Get a good job, work hard, pay off your mortgage and save into KiwiSaver. That's the money advice most Kiwis grew up with. But it's not enough anymore because over the last 20 years, wages have doubled, but house prices have more than tripled and the cost of living just keeps getting more and more expensive. So if you're serious about getting ahead, first you need to learn the 6 laws of building wealth in New Zealand, including why your salary will never make you wealthy on its own and the one move that actually does. And by the end, you'll know if your current money life is enough to get ahead or is quietly holding you back.
Now, most of what Kiwis are taught about wealth, in my view, is wrong. Get a good job, work hard, pay your mortgage, save your money into KiwiSaver, retire at 65 with a paid off house and enough to scrape by. And I think that advice was fine 20 years ago, back when wages were roughly keeping pace with house prices because the system worked, but I don't think it does anymore. So let's go through those 6 laws of building wealth. Andrew, what is law number 1?
Law number 1 is first, you work hard for your money, then you need your money to work hard for you. Now, the New Zealand dream used to be get a stable job, work hard, you get your, that was the gold watch. Was that even a thing? Did people get gold watches?
The gold watch was if you worked at a company for like 40 years, so you start there at 25, you retire at 65 and you get your gold watch.
You actually get a gold watch.
Well, that was my understanding, but I never worked anywhere for 40 years, Andrew.
I never saw that many gold watches. But anyway, if you worked hard, you had your financial security at 65 when you got the pension. But it has stopped working. Like incomes, like Ed said, haven't kept up with house price increases. And over the last 20 years, the median wage more than doubled. But the median Auckland house over that same period of time has more than tripled. So the gap is getting wider.
And a businessman that I knew.
The Pie Man,
it was the Pie Man. My mum was dating him. I really liked this guy because
Too bad your mum didn't as much as you did. You still go on about him.
Well, you see, the Pie Man left school, I think at 15, joined the family business, and he just worked in that business, in his own business, making pies of all things. It did very well financially. And he taught me a lot of good business lessons. My favorite one, which is going totally off topic, was that his staff would wear a uniform, right, while they're making their pies. And even though he worked in the office, he would always wear the uniform. And it was the same actually when I used to work at the warehouse. The CEO of the warehouse would always wear the same uniform as the people on the shop floor. And that was to show we're all one team. I'm no better than you. And that was one good lesson. The other good lesson that I learned of him is he would always say, first you work hard for your money, then it works hard for you. And the issue that I see is that if you are not investing any of your money at all, if you're working hard to earn it, but you spend it all, well, then there's no money left over to start working hard for you. So I see the role of your job is to earn an income, and then you take some of that income and you convert it into assets, and the assets grow and eventually produce some sort of passive income so that if you lose your job, your money from your income goes. But if you've built up some assets, well, the assets can potentially still fund you and pay for some of your lifestyle. And I think that's the difference between active income from your job and passive income from your assets. And so if you're really serious about growing wealth, you've got to start by asking yourself, well, how many assets do you actually own? And are you consistently buying more assets? And someone said to me recently, on this podcast, you bag on about the same things all the time. I'm like, yes, it's because we've done 2,400 episodes and eventually you run out of stuff to say. But the other thing is I still consistently see New Zealanders who say, yes, I should invest, but then don't actually have any assets, whether that is shares or property or savings set aside, some money somewhere. That's what we've got to build up, and we've got to go and do it. That's law number 1. What is law number 2?
Law number 2 is the money maths that nobody runs, and that is that leverage is the wealth accelerator. Now, getting into the right type of debt can help you build more wealth. And it is a double-edged sword because when the market's going down, it can be quite detrimental to your overall wealth as well. But this is a property podcast, and so we're going to talk about property. So let's say you put down a deposit and the bank lends you the rest of the money and you go and buy an investment property. Now, you control the entire property, even though the bank put in probably 80% or 70% of the money. You keep all of the profits, yeah, you got to fund the cash flow. But the main thing here is that if you put down a 20% deposit on a $500,000 purchase price, that's $100,000 of your money that you put in. But if the property goes up and doubles in value over a 15-year period, now it's worth $1 million. Well, you've turned your $100,000 into $1 million asset. Yep, you've got to pay back the $400,000 when you sell the property, but you've got a really high return on the money that you've put in, 5 times return on your cash. Now, try doing that in the share market. Yep, you might get a higher return year on year on average for shares, but it's all about the money that you put in and you don't get the bank's money.
Well, this is what I call the mortgage magnifier, right? Which is if you put in your $100,000 as a 20% deposit, you've put in 1/5 of the money. And so whatever return the market gives you, you get 5 times that. So if we take that same example of a $500,000 property, you've put in your 100K, the property goes up in value by 5%, so it's made 25 grand. Well, $25,000 worth of capital growth on your $100,000 isn't a 5% return. I mean, the house went up by 5%, but you got a 25% return on the deposit that you put in. And so you put in 1/5 of the money, you get 5 times whatever the market spits out. In this case, 5 times 5 is a 25% return. Now, there is a dark side to having the big mortgage as well, right? Which is if the property falls in value by, say, 10%, multiply that by 5, you got a negative 50% return, and your $100,000 has gone down to $50,000. So we've got to make sure we've got buffers to manage cash flow and make sure that if we are leveraging property, we're in it for the long term. But there is a good case for leverage being a wealth builder when used correctly over the long term. What's law number 3?
Cash flow plays defense and capital growth plays offense. So in most assets, whether it's investments like bonds or shares or property, there are growth assets and there are income assets. So take stocks, for example. Growth stocks like SpaceX, which is about to IPO, they tend to go up in value faster. But
let's hope it goes up in value faster. That's not financial advice, by the way. We're making no representation about whether SpaceX is going to go up or down in value, but I take your point.
Yeah, it's more likely to because it's a growth asset, but it's not going to give you much in the way of dividends. It's not an income asset. Now, there are income investments like bonds that pay a good income, but they don't tend to go up in value as quickly. Now, if we think of it like a sports game.
What sports have you ever played in your life?
I mean,
you'd be like me. You'd be on the badminton court.
Well, no, even like
we're not even cool enough for
yesterday, we had one of those sticks in the lawn with the thing that goes round.
That you whack the
and
ball.
Eliza's doing
whack
it.
Ball.
I'm like,
is that what it's called?
Don't know. It's about whack ball. But that's about as close to sports as I get. But I'm familiar with the industry. And if you play
are you?
How? I've seen it on a TV. If you play aggressively, you're more likely to win, but you've still got to have a good defense. And if you're going to only defend and suck at attacking, well, you're probably not going to win.
Because you're never going to score a goal, are you?
So I kind of see it like growth assets are playing the offense. You're trying to get ahead, build your wealth over the long term, but you still need to be able to protect that money in the short term with some income side of things.
Also, I kind of like this analogy, right? Because
you know as little about sports as me.
Well, you've got to score. Actually, I've started going to football games because I've got an Italian brother-in-law who's an absolute football nut, and Auckland FC is doing very well at the moment.
Are you talking about soccer?
Well, yeah, that's what the Americans would call soccer.
Okay, just
we
wanted to
call
make
it
sure.
Football, you see.
Okay.
He gets very grumpy if I call it soccer. Hey, it's me, Eduardo. And what you do see, though, is if you never score a goal, well, how are you going to win? You got to score a goal to win. But also, if you only score goals and the market scores too many goals against you, well, you're possibly going to lose as well. So we've got to have both sides, right?
But the trap I see as a financial advisor is many investors, they overinvest in yield and they buy in low growth regions because the rents look great and the prices look cheap. And then 10 years later, they wonder why it kind of hasn't built up much in the way of value and it hasn't increased their wealth. It hasn't done much to close their wealth gap.
But you've got to do both, right? Because as I said before, if you're too aggressive in your investing, you might go broke. If you play too much defense and you're too conservative, You might not make any money. There's a happy medium there. But that brings us to law number 4.
How you buy your property matters almost as much as what you buy. So let's take 2 New Zealand investors that buy the same property, they pay the same price, and they get the same rent. You think, well, they're going to get the same results, right? But one could pay significantly more in tax than the other because of the ownership structure.
So what's an example of that? Because I often hear accountants talk about all of this stuff, but I mean, it doesn't really get through my thick skull.
So let's say you got 2 properties and they earn collectively $10K a year on profit, taxable profit. Now, if you own that in a trust and you're paying the 39% tax rate, that's $3,900 in tax you're going to pay, and you get to keep the other $6,100. Now, if you own that as a couple and one of them's a stay-at-home parent not earning an income, and rather than have that in a trust, you put it in a look-through company and you funnel those profits through to the stay-at-home parent, that parent's tax rate is going to be 10.5% because it's the lowest tax bracket in New Zealand. So well, now they're only paying what is that? About
$1,040.
Yeah, $1,000 a year, right? So you get to keep the $9,000, and all of a sudden you've saved yourself almost $3,000 in tax just by having a different structure. Now, that's just 1 year. If you think about this over a longer period of time, that could have a significant difference in the amount of money that you end up taking home.
And that's because in a look-through company, you can say, okay, I've got $10,000 worth of profit. 99% of that is going to go to the parent who stays at home and their lower tax rate because they might own 99% of the property. Maybe only 1% of that is owned by person number 2, the person who go to work, and they might have a 33% tax rate. So there are ways to pay less tax. I also want to say we're never believers, and of course Andrew and I don't believe in rorting the tax system, right? But we also believe in not tipping the tax man and structuring your affairs to pay an appropriate amount of tax, the tax that you have to pay, but also not more than you have to pay. There are some very important caveats even to this example, right? Which is that tax isn't static. So what happens if the stay-at-home parent goes back to work, and let's say the person who was the stay-at-home parent actually earns a higher income when they go back to work. Now they're on a 39% tax rate, and now you're actually paying more tax than you might otherwise have to do. So it's very important that you review this frequently with your property accountant, but the maths on this at least checks out. Let's come to law number 5, which is the biggest wealth killer. And I actually think the biggest wealth killer out there is you, not the market, not you specifically, Andrew, but people in general, because most New Zealand investors don't lose money on property. They lose money on their own behavior. And what I mean by that is that Russell Investments put out a report every single year looking at the value of a financial advisor. Now, something that's really interesting is that the benefit you get from a financial advisor in terms of them putting your money into different assets, what we call asset allocation. So having some in shares and having some in property and having some in income and having some in growth, the benefit or the value of a financial advisor is actually quite low. It's 0.2%.
It's still something, but it's not as much as you think.
Yeah, so there is some value in that. They will help you make more money by making sure your money is in the right pockets and in the right buckets. What is amazing, most of the value of a financial advisor, according to this report, is in what they call behavioral coaching. And the value of a financial advisor, they put it at 3.6% of your money per year. So if you're investing $100,000, the value of having a financial advisor in terms of what you are doing is 3.6%. That is where most of the value comes from. And that can happen in 2 ways. It might be that they coach you to invest more than you otherwise would. It could also be that rather than you deciding to pull your money out of the market and sell your property when the value's down, they say, hold your horses, hold on. We're going to keep holding on to that asset because you don't want to buy high and sell low. We want to buy low and sell high. But if we sell at the bottom of the market, that might mean that you miss out on a lot of capital growth in the future. And what they see is that is where the vast bulk of the value of an advisor comes from. All up, they put it at 4.5% per year.
pretty significant, isn't it?
Yeah, 4.5% per year. This is specifically looking at shares and liquid investments as opposed to property, but it's a really good indicator of where that value is broken up. A lot of it is in the behavioral coaching.
And it's so true. Thinking as like just the experience I have with investors, like there is not really a secret sauce to investing. And most of my job is actually just giving people the courage to invest, giving them the numbers that they feel confident enough to actually do the thing to start investing. But also over the last few years, while it's been rough, I'd have an equal number of meetings with people saying, just stay the course as opposed to just get into the market. Like it's been a big part of our role here at Opus Partners. And I think that's really, really important to just be able to keep people on the right track when things are tough.
Well, this is where many investors will underperform the index. So sometimes you will hear people talk about that if you invest in the S&P 500 and you hold on to it for 20 years, your average annualized return is something like 9% or 8%, whichever period you're looking at, right? Because it changes all the time. But if you look at most investors over that same period, or many investors over that same period, many will get a lower return than the 8 or 9%. And you're like, well, how is it that if you just invested your money and held on for 20 years, how is it that you make less money than the market average? And the reason is because investors are buying and selling at the wrong time. They get to the bottom of the market and sell out or stop investing. And then once they see value start going up, they start investing more, but they've already missed some of that bounce back. And so that's where you might have the average, but actually many investors might underperform that because they needed some behavioral coaching, and it's just that you can't see the value of that. But that brings us to law number 6. What is the last law of growing wealth?
Build a machine, not a portfolio.
Okay, what's that mean?
So the amateur kind of thinks about it this way. I own 3 rental properties. Now, they're just a list of assets with no system or plan, whereas the professional investor, the person that's actually quite considered in their investing, they think, right, I've got a strategy. I know what my target is, and I know what I want that return to be. So I'm going to set my buying criteria, and I know what my exit looks like, and I know what my tax structure is. And it could be that, okay, I'm going to buy these 3 properties. I know I'm going to be able to sell that one because it's a growth asset. I'm going to pay off those other 2 yield assets, and then I'm going to live on the income forever. But they've got a clear plan in place, as opposed to, like, plenty of people have got rich from just going out there and buying a couple of rental properties, but they could have done so much better if they'd been considered and actually knew what the plan was. And I think, again, if you get into a rough patch, knowing what the long-term plan is much easier to stick to that plan than accepting that, market's gone down and maybe I've just bought the wrong property.
So I could understand that in theory, but what does that investment machine really look like in practice?
So I think you have to have a written strategy, first of all. And if I think about, that here at Opus is using an Opus Plus wealth plan, but you could do it yourself. You could just build it on a spreadsheet, but it does have to be written down. Because if it's not, then it's just kind of in your head, and then you can't go back to it when you're not getting the performance you're expecting right now.
I always say to investors as well, you will know if you have a written plan or not. And the test is, could you pull it up in 5 minutes on your computer? If you can't pull it up, or it's not on your fridge, you do not have a written plan. You do not have an investment plan. You've got to be able to tell me where it is on your computer and pull it up. That's how you know whether A, you've got one, and B, whether you're actually following it. If it's stuck in a drawer somewhere that someone gave you 20 years ago,
not a plan.
That don't count, because you can't find it, you don't know where it is, and you haven't been following it.
And you probably should be going back and reviewing it and tweaking it as well, because things change in 5 years, let alone 20. The next part is actually having targeted areas that are selected from data when you're buying your properties. So buying the property down the street, again, I'm not saying you can't make money out of that, but it's not the best way to be a considered investor. You need to be thinking about what the best return is going to be based on the location, not what's convenient to you. And that probably goes into number 3 as well, about having a buyer's criteria checklist. You need to know what it is you're going to spend, what you're looking for, what the rent needs to be roughly, or what the return needs to be, so that what your cash flow is going to roughly look like, and then running those numbers. So again, you can use something like Opus Plus or a spreadsheet, but you just have to have that criteria, because otherwise there's 35,000, 40,000 properties for sale at any one time. How the hell are you going to figure that out? What, you're just going to decide on one that looks good to you that you'd live in? No, that's not buying criteria. You need to have a checklist. Number 4 is actually having a team of people to help you with this. Now, you might use a property manager, you might not, but if you're going to buy in a location that's not where you live, property manager, a lawyer, an accountant, people that are specialists in the property field, and or if you're investing in shares, a good share broker, you need to basically have your A team so that they can make sure that you're on the right track and again give you that coaching when you need it. And number 5, you need that exit criteria. So part of your strategy is knowing, well, what does the exit look like? Am I going to sell all my properties, take the money? Then what am I going to do with that money? Am I going to put it in the bank? Am I going to put it into shares, managed fund? Or am I going to sell some properties, pay off the debt on the others? How am I going to get rid of that debt? Am I going to pay down it over the next 30 years? Or am I going to buy more properties so I can sell more and pay down the debt?
And look, all of these laws probably make sense in theory, right? You're like nodding along, like, yeah, okay, this all makes sense. The difficulty is actually applying them to your situation. Like, it's very easy to say, get a team, but how do you go and get the right team? It's very easy to say, have some buying criteria, but how do you actually set that criteria? And so one thing that I often see people write online is that when they go through our service at Opus Partners, they say, gosh, that was the easiest property I ever bought, because we can give you all of those things and surround you with the team and give you the buying criteria that we look for and the different properties as well. Now, you don't have to invest that way, but if you are interested, you can book a free portfolio planning session with an Opus Partners financial advisor. I'll drop the links down in the description so you can go book that in.
So now you've got the 6 laws of building wealth in New Zealand, but you can know all those 6 laws and still be frittering away $15,000 a year on stuff you can't even remember buying, which is why you need to know the 7 things to stop buying if you want to get rich, which is what I cover in the next video. Click the video on screen and watch it now.